chicken paprikash, galuska, and braised cabbage. Hungarian classics today on the Spicerer's table. Welcome to the Spicerer's table. I'm Joseph Duggan and our foray into Hungarian cuisine today. We're going to start our three recipes by making our green cabbage first. Braised green cabbage. And I'm going to turn my burner on here. We're going to turn it on to high. We're going to be cooking our braised cabbage with chicken fat. Being that we're doing a chicken paprikash, we're going to use chicken fat. But normally this would be cooked in lard. And I'm going to put about a tablespoon of it in there. And we can turn down our heat and just let it slowly warm. Braised cabbage is common in a lot of countries, from Sweden to Germany to Austria to Hungary and everywhere in between. It can be made with red cabbage or green cabbage. And it's often done as a sweet and sour, which means that it's going to have sugar like we have here, and sour. In this case, cider vinegar, but in Sweden you probably find it soured with red wine vinegar, and often it will have a slug of actual red wine in it. In Germany, it is often cider vinegar, and in Germany as well as Hungary, we're going to use apple cider to cook it. This is some dry cider. We need to start with our onions. We're going to put them into the pot here. We also have an apple here. We're going to add the apple later on in the process. We're going to put our onions into the pot here. This is an oval cookot. I've also preheated my oven to 350 degrees because the majority of the braise is going to be done in the oven. Last piece of onion here. I'm going to turn the heat up. We're going to talk about our spices. What I have here is a half a teaspoon of crushed dill seeds and a half a teaspoon of crushed caraway seeds and 4 bay leaves. We're going to add our spices directly in with our onions, along with a good pinch of salt. At this point here, the salt's going to help to draw out the and this is going to roast the spices as well as sauteing the onion. We want to get a little brown color on this. We're going to add later to this recipe, we're going to add our sugar. I have here 4 tablespoons of tomato juice, which is going to give it an interesting flavor and also give it a slight pink color. We have our apple cider vinegar. We have our hard apple cider, and this is dry cider, because I'm going to use this sweet opal apple here. Now that we're getting a sizzle here, we're going to turn this down. We're going to continue to cook this on moderately high heat. Smells wonderful. If you can't find dill seeds, you can use double the amount of caraway seeds would be fine. But it just has a wonderful flavor. Let it cook. We want to get some color on these onions. Let's watch them. You don't want to burn the onions and you don't want to burn the spices. It smells delicious, and especially being cooked in chicken fat. One ingredient that we are not putting in this recipe today is bacon. A lot of the recipes for braised cabbage contain bacon, but being as we are utilizing chicken in our entree, we are not going to be putting any bacon or lard in this recipe. But if you wanted to make this recipe and use it for something else, you were serving with meat, you could put some bacon in here if you wanted, but it's delicious here with the chicken fat. It's got a lovely flavor. We're starting to see the nice loveliness. We're getting a little color on them. Now I've turned the heat all the way up, and we're going to start deglazing here. We're going to add cider vinegar, 1 tablespoon of sugar, and 4 tablespoons of tomato juice. Now this we have to bring to a boil, and we have to cook this down. We need to reduce this by half, down to about 1/4 of a cup or so before we proceed. And then we're going to put in our apples and our cabbage and our apple cider, and we're also going to put in about 1 cup's worth of chicken stock, which is going to be our braising liquid. You could also use water, but chicken stock has more flavor. But if you don't have extra chicken stock, you could easily use water and it will be just fine. This has a tight fitting cover because we're going to be putting this into the oven. If you don't have a tight fitting cover, you can use a crimped piece of aluminum foil along with some plastic wrap. Measure out your aluminum foil and your plastic wrap, and the plastic wrap is going to go down first. And as long as you're careful, the plastic wrap will keep everything safe. This is almost done here, and then we'll start adding the rest of the ingredients. It smells lovely. And at the end of the recipe, make sure you pull the bay leaves out, because you do not want to eat them. The spices are fine to eat, you just don't want to eat the bay leaves. And about 4 tablespoons of liquid in here before we proceed. That concentrates all the nice flavors in here. Smells delicious. Tilting the pan just to see where I'm at here. If you don't like tomatoes or you can't eat tomatoes, you could eliminate the tomatoes and you could just proceed as is. But I like to put the tomato in here. It just adds another dimension of flavor in here. But the tomato is not traditional in this recipe. I like it, it just adds a nice flavor. So now we're down. We're going to put in our apples. We're going to put in our cabbage. And it's a lot of cabbage, folks. As you can see here, it's a lot of cabbage. We're also going to put in our chicken stock and our hard apple cider. This is a dry cider, but a sweet cider would be fine. If you're using a sweet cider, maybe you want to search out a dry, a tart apple. I'm going to grab some tongs here and give this a toss. And I'm also going to put in some salt at this point. You want it well seasoned. You want to get this tossed together so everything is coated. We want everything to come to a nice boil. It smells lovely. We want to start, we want to see a little wilting on the cabbage before we proceed to the oven, where it's going to braise for about 45 minutes. If you're doing red cabbage cooks a lot longer. The heat is high, yes. Excellent. Okay. So it is all tossed together. Go back Takes a little bit to come to a boil, but it needs to come to a full boil before we put the lid on and put it into the oven. The last little bit of onions on there. Just a little bit of cabbage. And the second thing we're going to be starting is our chicken itself, and then the third recipe that we're going to make is we will be doing our galuska. And we'll talk about drop noodle dumplings. And a cool machine that I have here, one of the coolest gadgets I have, the Austrian Spitzel maker, which we will talk about in a little bit. Starting to see bubbling and steaming, so that's a good sign here. This is going to be covered. This is going to go off to a 350-degree preheated oven, and it's going to cook for 45 minutes. This dinner comes together in about an hour. And when we come back, we will be starting on our chicken. Welcome back to the Spicerer's table, and we are going to be making our chicken paprikash. Chicken paprikash is one of the national dishes of Hungary. Paprikash in general is one of the national dishes. Let's restart that. Welcome back to the Spicerer's table. We're going to be making our chicken paprikash. Paprikash in general is one of the national dishes of Hungary, along with its cousin, which is goulash. Paprikash is made with a variety of meats, from chicken to veal and sometimes beef, and I believe probably even pork. But the most common is chicken and veal. You can also find paprikash in other countries, and that's commonly done as chicken paprikash. Poland, it's famous for it too. Paprikash and goulash, which when you look at the spelling, the end is AS with an apostrophe, with the little apostrophe on it, and it looks like paprikas or gulas, even though it's pronounced with an SH. And they share in the spicing. The first spicing is our spice mixture. Here I have caraway seeds, 3/4 of a teaspoon, dill seeds, 3/4 of a teaspoon, half a teaspoon of dried thyme, and 4 bay leaves, which I have ground. Can't find dill seeds, you can use all caraway seeds. And here is the paprika itself. This is a blend, and what I have here is sweet paprika. 2 tablespoons of sweet paprika and 2 teaspoons of the genuine sieged Pride of Hungary Cispos hot paprika. If you don't like spicy food, you can omit the hot paprika and utilize 2 more teaspoons of the sweet paprika. And what we're going to do first is we're going to make a little enrichment. So what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to take 1/2 teaspoon of our spice blend. And I'm going to place it in this little pan. You could also use a small saucepan, would do fine. And we're going to take 1 teaspoon of our paprika here. The rest of it is going to go earlier in our recipe. Then we're going to add about a scant tablespoon of chicken fat. And I'm going to turn on the heat. And we're going to cook this until we can smell the spices. Doesn't take very long, and we're going to arrest that cooking with 1/2 cup of chicken stock. Just make sure you stir it the entire time, and you will see some bubbling, and you will smell the spices. It's important to do this carefully and always be stirring, because you don't want the fat to burn or the spices to burn in the fat. Keep stirring. Now I'm smelling the spices and I'm seeing the bubbling. So I'm going to shut off the heat. I'm going to arrest with chicken stock. I have a little bowl here, and I'm going to pour the mixture into the bowl. Later on, we're going to stir in whisk in some sour cream into this enrichment mixture here that we have made, and this is going to be stirred in at the end of our recipe. Okay. Put that out of the way now. We will also move this enrichment out of the way, and we will talk about our ingredients. First ingredient, mushrooms, which we are going to cook our mushrooms first. Then we're going to remove the mushrooms and we are going to brown our chicken. We're going to remove our chicken. And then we are going to be dealing with onions. We're going to do our onions and our spice mixture number 1. After we cook our spice mixture number 1 and our onions, we're going to add our green pepper. What I have here, this is chile güero. You can find it in a Mexican market. I have 3 of them here. If you can find the Hungarian wax pepper, go ahead and use that instead and just use 1. They have a little bit of spiciness to them. So if you don't like spicy flavor and you can't handle spiciness, you can use a small Cubanelle pepper or a small green bell pepper here. It will work fine. I also have 4 large cloves of garlic that I have minced as well. But this green pepper or the Hungarian wax pepper is an approximation to what you would get in Hungary. We're going to be using that as well. And then later we will be adding our paprika plus 2 teaspoons of flour. We're also going to be using some white wine. I like dry vermouth. We're going to be using salt and pepper, and then I have 4 tablespoons. This is chopped tomato pulp. You could also use ground tomatoes. I wouldn't recommend using tomato puree because it's going to make it taste too tomatoey. Also going to have chicken stock, which is 2.5 cups. The other half cup we have put with our enrichment. So we're going to preheat our pan here over high heat, and we're going to cook our mushrooms first. We're going to put a tablespoon of chicken fat in here. Now in cooking these mushrooms are a sponge, so they're going to absorb all the fat. Don't be tempted to add more fat to the mushrooms. It's important here that you don't add more fat because then more fat's going to come out when these mushrooms are fully cooked. You want to wait until we see the veils in the oil, and then we're going to put these mushrooms in a single layer. We're going to cook them. Doesn't take very long to cook mushrooms. Okay. Go ahead and add the mushrooms. Keep that for my last. And I'm going to put a little salt on these mushrooms, which will help to draw out their juices. Also going to turn the heat down because we don't want to burn them. We're doing the mushrooms first so the mushrooms are fully cooked before we proceed, and then we can stir the mushrooms in at the end of the recipe. So we'll just leave them alone. Adjust our heat. We're fine. We'll just adjust it down a little bit. Now I'm going to take my lid here and I'm going to cover this and trap a little of the steam, which will help to soften the mushrooms. You will know when the mushrooms are cooked that their liquid has evaporated and all the fat has been released back into the pan, because we're going to use that fat plus a little more to brown our chicken. And for the chicken here, I have 4 pounds of boneless, skinless chicken thigh meat that I have cut into pieces. I skinned and boned it myself, but you can buy the already boneless, skinless chicken thigh meat. And it's very important here, I have left all the fat on. Later on we will spoon that fat off of our dish. But you want to leave it on so it remains juicy throughout its braise. Now we're going to open this up. Do some nice steam. Give these a toss. And they'll have some nice color on them. They're getting some nice color on them. And the mushrooms I have are quartered. They're just regular store-bought button mushrooms. You don't need to use wild mushrooms. In fact, you wouldn't want to. They're going to have too much flavor for this. And they're just quartered. You do not want to use sliced mushrooms because sliced mushrooms will disappear. The quartered mushrooms are going to have nice texture along with our chicken. Okay. It's almost there. Almost there. The mushrooms don't need to be 100% fully cooked, but about 90% is fine. You're starting to see liquid come out of these mushrooms. Okay. Smells wonderful. If you're making a steak with mushrooms, with a mushroom sauce, this is the way to go, is to start with the mushrooms and then sear your steaks. And then you can slide the cooked mushrooms back in the pan. I'm going to pull my dish over here where we're going to put our mushrooms. I'm going to pull all of our mushrooms out. And we're doing it all in the same pan here. Now I'm going to turn the heat down a little bit, and we're going to heat up some more fat in here to augment. And we'll leave our mushrooms here. And now we have our chicken. And we're going to do the chicken in batches. We're not going to do the chicken all at one time. Because if we put all the chicken in here, it's going to steam rather than get a nice browning on it. So it's important to do the chicken in one single layer. Everything will all fit in this pan. And you see the little bits of smoke, that means we're ready to go. And I have just seasoned the chicken with salt. You haven't put any pepper or seasonings of any kind, other seasonings on here. That's a good layer. Okay. Now I'm going to turn this down a little bit here so that it's not roaring. You want to get a good color on this, but we don't want to burn the chicken. This chicken will render out more of its own fat, so we may not have to add any extra fat in here. I do have extra just in case we need it, but we may not need to use the rest of it. And you can buy chicken fat. It comes in a jar. Buy it from the supermarket. Also, if you make a lot of chicken stock, you could have your own chicken fat. Keeps well in the freezer. Comes in a jar. Just has to be spooned out into a small little butter pan and warmed until it's fully melted. And if you're looking here, that's what we want to see. Nice brown bits here. Get them all turned over. Start the other side browning. Smells wonderful in here. Too bad we don't have smell-o-vision. When are they going to invent that? This chicken smells wonderful cooking in its own fat. If you can't find chicken fat, you can use avocado or grapeseed oil here. That would be fine. Okay. And you're getting some nice color on this because it is in one single layer. As we started this with all of the chicken in here, it would just steam, and that's not what we want in this recipe. Turn my heat up just a little bit here, okay? I have a vessel here that we're going to put our chicken into. Okay. It's important to use a slotted spoon to remove the chicken from the pan so that the fat remains, so that we can do the rest of our chicken here. You've got nice fat here back in the pan. Let it heat back up. We'll start loading in another layer of chicken. If you're doing a double recipe of this, you can do the large saute pan if you find. Just make sure it's a deep saute pan and then it can fit everything. I can probably fit the rest of this in here. We're just going to find a spot for all of it. So it took about 2 batches here. We're going to be able to fit it all in here. The last one here, yeah. Turn my heat back up just a little bit. And here I have half of an onion that's been chopped. We have our 3 chili fuertes, or use 1 Hungarian black pepper, or substitute 1 Cubanelle pepper or 1 green bell pepper that's been diced, cut into small dice. We also have 4 cloves of garlic that have been chopped. We have here 4 tablespoons, quarter of a cup, of our chopped tomato pulp, 2½ cups of chicken stock, 2 teaspoons of flour. And this is Wonder Flour because it's easier to use Wonder Flour here because it's going to blend very simply. I'm also going to use a ½ cup of white wine, which we will reduce in here. And the wine just adds a bit of acidity into the recipe. You can see the recipe's flipped here. Back into one single layer. Turn the heat back up all the way to high. And it looks like we're probably not going to need to add any extra fat in here, but if we needed to, we could add more fat in here. Got my other tool here. Start to pull some of these. Very nicely brown. If you're getting, well, if you got pieces that are well browned, they can be removed. Browning just gives that other flavor because if you dumped everything in here, all the ingredients, it would be decent, but it wouldn't have that special flavor because you didn't take each step carefully. Now we'll pull the rest of this chicken out of here. Okay, we got plenty of fat for the cooking purposes. Next, we're going to slide in our onions. Just our onions at this point. One piece of pepper in there is one in, but it's fine. We're also going to turn the heat down at this point. And we're also at this point going to put in our spices. Just our spices along with our onions. And this looks a little dry, so I'm actually going to put another half teaspoon of fat in here. Okay. I don't have the heat on super high right now because we don't want to burn the spices. We want the onions to become soft and translucent before we proceed. At this point, we're going to season with salt. I'm also going to grind in a little pepper at this point. A little bit later, we'll be adding our paprika in to our mixture here. I'm actually going to put a little more of this, the rest of it in here because we're going to be adding flour and the paprika, and I don't want the pan to be too dry. So that's another teaspoon and a half in here. That's good. We'll be able to spoon off excess fat later on in the recipe. Now we can add our garlic and our green pepper. Landed in our chicken. And now this needs to cook another couple of minutes to bloom the garlic and to start softening the green pepper. It smells wonderful in here. I'm going to turn back up the heat a little bit. Just keep an eye on it. This is going to braise on the stove. I'm actually going to remove it to the stove in the back there while we make our galuska. And we'll just let it braise on the stove. Start to smell it. It smells wonderful. Now we can go ahead and we're going to put our paprika in here. And we have our chicken stock and our wine close by. I'm also going to add our flour. Just throw it in. It's going to cook long enough to where you don't need to worry about cooking the flour. I've lifted the pan off here because we don't want to burn the paprika. Now we're going to put about half of a cup in here. I'm going to let the wine cook out before we proceed here. And it will thicken up, yes. It's a lovely color because of that paprika. Now we're going to put in our tomato. 4 tablespoons of chopped tomato pulp. Excellent. Now we're going to add our chicken stock, 2.5 cups. I'm going to put in a little more salt at this point, a little more ground pepper. And at this point we're going to stir, making sure to get everything dissolved. You need to make sure all your flour and your paprika dissolve into the stock. And before we get more chicken in there, I'm going to taste for seasoning. Salt. Definitely needs a little salt. It will cook down. There's a nice little piquancy in there. It's lovely. And next we can start to add our chicken back in and add any of the accumulated juices with our chicken. Okay. Awesome. Give it a stir. Now we need to bring this to a full boil before we drop it down to a simmer and cover it, and we're going to let it cook for 45 minutes. And then we will uncover it and let it cook a little longer. Uncover it. The spice gets you in the back of the throat, but it's lovely stuff. It's going to be delicious. Needs to come to a full boil before we turn it down. That's important. If we turn it down before it came to a full boil, then it'll take a long time before it gets to the bubble, and the chicken might not be fully cooked at the end or not tender. And as you can see here, this is a pan that's just big enough to hold everything. That's very important. You don't want to use a pan that's not big enough. You could also use a Dutch oven for this, would be fine. But I find it works well in a pan like this, or a gigantic saucier would do fine too. But this works great for me, and it can also be served out of the same pan. Starting to see bubbles, we need to see full bubbles, and then we'll be able to transfer it to the stove in the back. And we will proceed with making our galuska. Talk about the Spätzle maker, and talk about drop noodle dumplings, and talk about the different dumplings, noodle dumplings that are found in Hungary. The mushrooms we're going to save for later. It's important to put those in towards the end because we don't want to overcook the mushrooms. Similarly to coq au vin and beef bourguignon, you always put the mushrooms and the onions in towards the end because they are already cooked. It's just to heat them together. This is going to braise about 45 minutes. Let's have a timer ready to go. And our cabbage has about 11 minutes left. And then when the cabbage is done, I'm just going to turn the oven off, and just leave it in the turned off oven, and it will stay warm. The cabbage took about 45 minutes to cook. If you have everything prepped, you can do it all at the stove at the same time using 2 burners. I just wanted to show everything. That's why I did them separate. We are almost at a full boil here. And we'll cover with the lid and let this simmer for 45 minutes. I'm going to leave it partially uncovered, just ajar. And I'm going to place this on the back burner, and when we come back, we're going to be making galuska.